Guys, why are you laughing? Oh, would you look at that? It turns out my, Okay. A personal pet peeve of mine is horrible video game adaptations. Given the amount of time I sink into analyzing characters and stories and mechanics within these video games, I kinda hate when Hollywood takes these and just ruins them. And we're not talking these open to interpretation type of things. We're talking straight up themes that just don't make sense within the context. And one big example of this is Silent Hill. I've been badgered into doing this by a couple of fellow YouTubers. They are well aware of who they are, and vengeance will be mine someday. But for now, let's get started. We'll be breaking down the heroes, the villains, the story, the visuals, the soundtrack, and the lasting impact of both the movie and the games. It's worth noting here that the movie takes notes from both Silent Hill 1 and Silent Hill 2, and so I'll have to include a comparison of both in order to get my point across. So, without further ado, let's get started. The movie and the game both start in a similar fashion. Both parents have taken their daughters to Silent Hill, both for varying reasons. However, through circumstance they both end up in the town. Both see an apparition in the middle of the road, both swerve off the road. They have each lost track of their daughters, and have resolved to find them within the town of Silent Hill. They both notice a figure in the distance resembling their daughter, and readily, without a second thought, they pursue her. Their search leads them to an alleyway, and the town begins to change around them. The town covered in rust, covered in decay. They explore, hoping to find their daughters. What they discover? A corpse, a symbol of things to come. Apparitions appear, and begin to attack our protagonists. Overwhelmed, it appears as if they have been killed, only to wake up in a building nearby, now questioning their sanity. Sadly, this is where my positivity over the film ends. It does actually spend a significant amount of time creating atmosphere that's similar to the game, from its use of the soundtrack to the use of the visuals. After that though, it kinda goes downhill, and I will tell you why. Let's start with the main characters. While our main characters are motivated by the same goal, they are by no means the same person. From the game's perspective, we have Harry Mason, a single father, a widower. Professionally, he is a writer, and his goal is simply to take Cheryl on a holiday. Silent Hill in the game's universe being a popular tourist attraction. He isn't necessarily motivated by any particular message or any particular signs that she needs to go there. From his perspective, he was just being a good father and spending time with his daughter. Circumstances then lead to him having to save his daughter from the horrible cult that exists within the town. And as he discovers more and more of the story behind it, he becomes more and more motivated to do so. Between the two, Harry Mason seems to be the more trustworthy one, with Sybil readily being able to equip him with a pistol so that he can defend himself from the monsters that exist within the town. It's a bit of a weird decision for a police officer to do that, but it also speaks volumes of how trustworthy Harry Mason really is. We compare this with our cinematic protagonist, Rosa da Silva, a happily married mother who is motivated to go to Silent Hill with her daughter after hearing her speak of it in her sleepwalking, believing that coming across the town might indeed help her deal with the visions that she is seeing. On a surface level, this seems a little crazy. From a horror context, I understand why it happened. We need something to move the story forward. She does this after seeing that the medication isn't working and none of the therapy is working, and so takes more direct action in order to help her daughter deal with the circumstances. But weirdly, between the two, Harry Mason seems a bit more empathetic. Realistically speaking, his goals are a lot more simplified. There are no signs indicating that Silent Hill would be a dangerous place prior to him taking Cheryl there for a holiday. With Rosa, there's far more going on. Her daughter seems in agony every time she mentions or screams Silent Hill, even if it is done through sleepwalking. Her intentions might be good, but goddamn, the end result is bad. And surely these signs should have pointed towards the fact that she shouldn't have gone there to begin with. But here we are, they are in Silent Hill, and the daughter's gone. Fair to her though, just like Harry, she does go through quite a few ordeals in order to get her daughter back, readily rushing towards any clue that she can find, and actively making an effort to find her. There are a couple of side characters here, one of which mirrors directly and the other two aren't even present in the original game. Sybil Bennett is the first and most prominent side character. In both instances, she seems to be a support character for both of our protagonists, helping them both find their daughters and helping them both navigate through Silent Hill. The difference here seems to be that Sybil doesn't accompany Harry throughout the town, but she does accompany Rosa da Silva throughout the town. In both instances, she seems to be the honorable police officer, trying to do her best in order to do good in this town. The big difference to her character arc between the games and the movies though is that the game is far more optional. In the movie, she is burned alive by the cult. the leader convincing her subjects that she is in fact a witch and needs to be burned at the stake, her fate sealed right from the get-go. In the game, Sybil can either live or die depending on the player's actions. Having been infected by the mysterious parasite that's throughout the town, you can either purify her or shoot her to death, with Sybil's ultimate fate being in the hands of the player. This isn't a fair comparison, but it's worth noting that the actual fate that is canonical to the timeline is that Sybil does survive. And I think here, the comparison is fair. In the movie, she appears to go down in a blaze of glory, no pun intended, but the actual contextual reason for her death seems a bit weak on the surface, since in the games, the actual reason doesn't really align well with the film, or survival in this case. It's another weird change because I feel like the cult in the movie actually just assumes everybody outside of it's a witch, and if they're treating everything as some sort of sign of dark magic, then none of Sybil's actions would have mattered and it would have led to her death inevitably. We get another character who's meant to act as our lens into the cult, named Anya. She doesn't appear to be all up there because she exhibits a fair bit of childlike behavior. She seems a bit more loyal to the cult, believing that they'll keep her safe, but also isn't entirely against the idea of helping outsiders, displaying further childlike innocence. I feel like this falls a bit flat though because we don't really get a semblance of who she is outside of this. She has no particular backstory or anything that really ties her to anything outside of the cult. And so while she was helpful, we do also recognize that she would have also been an advocate for burning them at the stake. And so when she dies, we don't really feel that bad. This is evidenced by her treatment of Dahlia as she's walking up the stairs. The other large character that we get is the Harry Mason stand-in, Chris Da Silva. He is quite possibly the most useless character in the film. He spends his time trying to contextualize what happened in Silent Hill for the audience, but a lot of this is already done within the town with the other characters, and so why he's even there is just beyond me. I really don't have a lot to say on him besides the fact that he's fucking useless. On that note, let's move on to the villains. Needless to say, I'm going to start with the main comparison. Dahlia Gillespie. Dahlia in the game is the main antagonist. Dahlia within the game is overacted to say the least, but as far as characters go, she's a lot better than the movie variant. See, in the film, she's painted as this mother who's lost her child, one that has slowly lost her sanity and all hope in the world because she gave her daughter up to be burned to death, with this weird reasoning being that she was a witch. It's simplistic and makes her far more sympathetic than it does in the game, where instead she is the leader of the cult. She actually goes out of her way to paint herself in a more sympathetic light. She says crazy things, but she makes clear that her intentions are nothing but good, manipulating Harry's desire to save his daughter in order to achieve her own ends. This is far more engaging than the character that we got in the film. Dahlia seems present everywhere within the game and she seems to manipulate everything to go her way. She is clearly smart, capable, and knows how to talk to people, which only further enhances her personality as this leader of a cult. Both of what happens to Alessa is horrible, but within the game there's a reason behind it outside of witchcraft. Dahlia's whole goal is to use her daughter as a proxy to give birth to this ultimate demon, and rebuild the world how she sees fit. She has goals! This is amazing. This is how it should be. In the movie, Dahlia's replacement is Christabella. She instead acts as this leader of the cult, and all she really does is control people into believing that everything outside of their realm is witchcraft. Supposedly, she convinced the entire cult that a post-apocalypse situation had happened, and they had to do whatever they could in order to self-preserve. This included killing any outsiders. She too also comes off as balanced at first, but once you see that all she really wants to do is kill people so that she can remain in leadership, it seems entirely wasteful. It's annoying to say the least, and entirely wasteful when you want a character that's supposed to act as this big bad for the entire film. Alessa, from a more subjective standpoint, is also a villain in the stories. A child with great psychokinetic energy that is able to have an impact on the town. In the movie, she is burned at the stake because of these powers and because she is perceived to be a witch. The cult once again exercising their need for self-preservation. As mentioned before, this is largely indiscriminate and isn't exactly a very effective reason in order to do anything. In the game, however, because she is born with this psychokinetic energy, her mother sees this as a chance in order to achieve her own goals. In the movie, it's revealed that Alessa can cast herself in projections, similarly to how she can in the game. But the reasoning for it is because in the movie she wants someone to save her from her fate and act as the proxy for her vengeance. This is actually okay, I don't mind this so much. I mean, Alessa would be vengeful after everything that happened to her. However, it does delete the proxy storyline from the entire ordeal. In the games, it was actually Dahlia who cast a spell in order to guide Harry's presence over to Silent Hill, further showcasing Dahlia's villainy and her ability to manipulate things. Ugh, God. There are more villains present throughout the game and throughout the film. In the game, the villains take the form of monsters that are psychologically tied to Alessa's consciousness, each one demonstrating a fear that she had or one that she developed over time. This is effective because the characters become the recipients of another person's horror. And in a way, it's kind of like she's fighting back using her own fears as a weapon. The town of Silent Hill serving to enhance these fears and bring them to life accordingly. This means that everything is tied together, cohesively, and that the monsters have defined reasons for being there. In the movie, they kinda don't. Outside of the opening sequence, all we really get is Pyramid Head and the nurses. Pyramid Head and the nurses. Silent Hill 2 monsters? Here is where the divisiveness kinda took place with these monsters. In the games Silent Hill 2, Pyramid Head and the nurses both represent something to James Sunderland. The nurses being physical manifestations of James' entire sexual frustration, and Pyramid Head representing the darker sides of James Sunderland, and to an extent his desire to be judged. These are deep and engaging reasons for them being present, as they act as an outward manifestation of everything that James Sunderland represents, and all of the things he is hiding within himself. On the other end of the spectrum, within the movie, the nurses are just sort of there as things that react to light, and Pyramid Head is meant to be a protector? What the fuck is going on here? Did they just paint Pyramid Head in a positive light and make him a protagonist? These guys saw what he did in the games, right? Especially to like the mannequins? I just can't. I think this was the most divisive thing for me within the film. The psychological aspects were lost due to the fact that the monsters were introduced as throwaway characters, just as these scary things that exist within the town, rather than representing the inner turmoils of the characters that are present within the story. It's a little frustrating, but it's what the movie did, and I'm not really happy with it. Let's move on to the story. The story for both the game and the movie are a bit obscure to say the least. The story of the game leaves itself very open to analyzing, leaving hints and clues and making sure that you are the one to put the puzzle together. It goes out of its way to show rather than tell you explicitly what happened within the universe, through notes, through puzzles, through hints and clues given throughout the game and throughout the areas that you explore, being obtuse on purpose for heavy-hitting revelations later on. This is why its story is still discussed all these years later. Shameless promo, but this is exactly why it was my first analysis video. The game is incredibly varied in terms of the themes and ideas it presents and how you move forward from them. The movie is quite simplistic by comparison, bearing a far simpler story where none of the characters carry any depth and witchcraft seems to be the entire motivation for the reasons everybody does things. I didn't have anything that I could pick apart when I was watching this film. Nothing that really showcased any ideas behind why people do anything. No particular backstories presented outside of the ones about Cheryl and Alessa. This kinda sucks. And I understand that movies have to make concessions when they're adapting, but it also explicitly tells you pretty much everything that's going on, thereby making revelations a lot less impactful over time. My best example of this is actually when Alessa is explaining herself in the film. Alessa actually walks you through the fact that she was bullied, called a witch, and she talks about it at length. However, in the game, you're shown the effects of it. 1, through the child demons that are shown throughout the game. 2, the shy black demon that's shown throughout the game. 3, the fact that the school is a location for nowhere. And 4, the desk that is shown much later on, engraved with messages that imply that she was bullied as a child. Visual storytelling is the key here rather than outright stating what's happening. As the player, we now have clues as to what happened and now we can piece it together, using our imaginations to figure out what Alessa's backstory really was. The psychological output of these events always on display and thereby making everything far more effective as a horror story and as a narrative in general. The movie doesn't carry the same level of intrigue due to the fact that it leaves everything out on the table, coupled with the fact that the antagonists have changed, the monster representation has changed, and suddenly this makes the whole thing far less intriguing. Maybe we can move on to some positives now, eh? Now, I don't need to tell you that the visual design for Silent Hill is incredibly effective within the games. Silent Hill exists on 2 levels within the gaming universe. The first layer, which is covered in fog and ash falling from the sky, and the second, which is nowhere, the manifestation of all of Alessa's fears. I talk about this at length in my analysis video, but I'm going to briefly cover it here. The hardware limitations of the PS1 is used to its advantage here. The low draw distance being the technical reason for why the fog is even there to begin with, creating claustrophobia within an open area. The movie does the same thing, and this is incredible because it follows the design one for one almost. And I'll admit, when the movie introduced that as an idea, I was pretty pleased. Within the game, on the upper layer of Silent Hill, everything else is pretty much clean and intact. This, for me, makes it even more terrifying when demons invade the area. It looks so calm, serene, dare I say silent. With no other humans present, you are anticipating the idea that a monster will appear out of nowhere. It's pretty good, honestly. This for me is where the movie kind of falters because everything is already destroyed. As a result, you kind of already know something is wrong. Rather than it being a question of Harry's sanity, it ends up being a question of what's actually already in the town with you. And for me, this removes a great deal of tension from the actual visual storytelling. It doesn't suck entirely, I get why they did that. But for me, it's a small piece of the puzzle that could have indeed made for a more effective scare in the long run. Weirdly though, the movie decides to use locations from the second game over the first game, using the hospital and using the hotel as locations to tell its story, even replicating some of the shots from the second game. I don't really know why, and I don't really know what it's for. I assume these locations seemed a bit more interesting to the directors. I don't know, it seemed like a slapdash merge of these two games in order to try and make one big narrative, which is less than ideal. The final noteworthy thing I'll point out is the soundtrack. I cannot complain about the movie soundtrack because it's one-to-one ripped from the games. But again, puzzlingly, they used the soundtrack from Silent Hill 2 over the one from Silent Hill 1. They do use some of the soundtrack in Silent Hill 1, for example, when you start up the film, it plays the intro theme. And it does use some of the industrial soundtrack in order to accentuate a few of the horrifying elements. But outside of that, it's all Silent Hill 2 sounds. And the sounds in Silent Hill 2 were developed specifically for the characters of that game. And so when these sounds play for other characters that they're unrelated to, I don't feel the same way. Or any way for that matter. I end up thinking about the characters from Silent Hill 2 because they were just better. Not like as people, as characters. Like James Sunderland is a horrible human being, but he's a better character. Anyway, lasting impact, I guess? If it's any indication of the lasting impact of either the film or the game, I had actually forgotten the movie even existed. I was reminded of it by a couple of viewers and then the idea to make the video happened. But the movie is so forgettable in comparison to the games. The fact that the games still stand out as a horror masterpiece and still makes it onto these top 10 lists, despite the general consensus that a higher poly count equals higher horror amount, Silent Hill 1 still shines as this example of horror done correctly. That horror games can have effective narratives and can still make you think all these years later. Silent Hill the movie does the exact opposite, simplifying what was a complex story and then catering it to the wrong kind of audience. It's cited as an example of why video game adaptations don't work. And so, happily, I'm leaving it behind. This is the last time I'll ever talk about the film, or any cinematic adaptation of Silent Hill. Silent Hill 1 is the superior specimen. There's no arguing that, so that's that.